My name is Eleanor Hart, and I was 69 years old when my son told me I would ruin their vacation. The strange thing about moments that change your life is how ordinary they look at the beginning. There was nothing dramatic about that afternoon. I was standing in my backyard, watering the roses I had planted 15 years earlier. The sun was warm, the air smelled like fresh grass, and somewhere in the distance a lawnmower hummed steadily. My phone rang. When I saw Daniel's name on the screen, I smiled. My son rarely called during the day. Usually he sent quick messages. Busy today. Talk later. Kids have practice. So when he called, I assumed something important had happened. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hello, sweetheart." His voice had that slightly distracted tone he gets when he's multitasking. I could practically picture him pacing around the kitchen with his laptop open, and 3 different conversations happening at once. "I wanted to run something by you," he said. "Of course." "Well, we're planning a family vacation this summer." "That sounds wonderful." "We're thinking about Italy. 2 weeks. Rome, Florence, and then maybe the coast." Italy. The word alone made my heart lift a little. I had always wanted to go there. When Daniel was a boy, we used to watch travel documentaries together on Sunday evenings. I remembered how he once told me that when he grew up, he would take me to Rome so we could see the old buildings and eat real Italian pizza. There was a pause on the phone. "Mom," he said carefully, "I wanted to talk about whether it makes sense for you to come." The wording was polite, but something in my chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "Well, it's going to be a pretty packed trip. Lots of walking. Trains. Busy days." "I walk every morning," I said lightly. "I know. It's just vacations like this move fast." Another pause. Then he said the sentence that stayed with me longer than anything else. "I'm worried you might slow everyone down or accidentally ruin the vacation." He didn't say it cruelly. He said it like someone explaining a practical concern. But it still felt like someone had quietly closed a door. "I see," I said. "That's not exactly what I mean," he added quickly. "It's just that the kids have been really excited about this trip for months. Museums, hikes, maybe a boat tour. And you know how teenagers are." I did know. I had raised Daniel alone after his father died when Daniel was 12. I had worked 2 jobs, helped him with homework late at night, and sat through endless soccer practices. "I understand," I said softly. "We can always plan something smaller later," he added. "Maybe a quiet weekend somewhere closer." Something smaller. Something easier. Something appropriate. We ended the call politely, but the garden didn't feel the same afterward. Later that evening I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and thought about what Daniel had said. The thing about getting older is that people start making decisions for you long before you ask them to. They assume your world should shrink. Fewer responsibilities. Fewer adventures. Fewer risks. As if life slowly transitions from living to waiting. I had never been very good at waiting. A week later Daniel came over for dinner with his wife Laura and the kids. The house filled instantly with noise the way it always does when grandchildren arrive. My granddaughter Sophie rushed into the kitchen. "Grandma, Dad says you're not coming to Italy." Laura winced. "Sophie." But children rarely soften the truth. I smiled gently. "It's all right." Sophie frowned. "But you love traveling." "Ido." "So why aren't you coming?" Daniel cleared his throat. "Well, it's a complicated trip." Laura added carefully, "There will be a lot of moving around." Sophie looked confused. "You walk more than Dad." I had to hide a smile. The conversation drifted to other things, school projects, work updates, plans for the weekend. But something had shifted. I noticed how often Daniel explained things to me slowly, as if I might struggle to follow. I noticed how Laura offered to cut my steak for me at dinner. Small things, tiny gestures that people believe are kindness. But they carry a quiet message. You are becoming fragile. That night after they left, I opened my laptop. I typed 3 simple words. Flights to Rome. The prices were surprisingly reasonable. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. Not because I was afraid, because I realized something important. Nobody had actually asked if I wanted to go. The decision had simply been made for me. I clicked book. Then I booked a small hotel near the historic center of Rome. When the confirmation email arrived, I laughed out loud. Perhaps Daniel was right. Perhaps I would ruin the vacation. Just not in the way he expected. The flight to Rome was long but peaceful. When you travel alone, the world feels slightly different. You notice small details. The way clouds look like mountains from 30,000 feet. The quiet conversations between strangers. The moment when the plane breaks through the clouds and reveals a new country below. When I stepped out of the airport, warm Mediterranean air wrapped around me like a welcome. Rome smelled like espresso, old stone, and summer heat. My hotel was small and charming, tucked between two narrow streets filled with tiny cafes and flower boxes. From my window I could see people sitting outside drinking coffee and talking with animated gestures. For 2 days I explored the city alone. I walked through ancient streets. I visited quiet churches where sunlight streamed through stained glass windows. I sat at outdoor cafes and listened to the rhythm of Italian conversations around me. Traveling alone means you move at the pace of curiosity instead of the pace of schedules. On the third day, Daniel sent a message. We arrived safely. No mention that I might already be there. No curiosity about what I was doing. That evening I decided to have dinner near the Trevi Fountain. The restaurant was lively and warm, filled with voices and clinking glasses. As I stepped inside, I heard a very familiar voice. Mom. Daniel stood near a table with Laura, the kids, and Laura's parents. His expression looked like someone who had just seen a ghost ordering pasta. What are you doing here? He asked. I smiled calmly. Having dinner. Laura blinked. You came to Italy? Yes. When? 2 days ago. Daniel stared at me. You traveled here alone? Yes. Sophie jumped out of her chair. Grandma, that's awesome. Daniel still looked stunned. But why didn't you tell us? I shrugged gently. You seemed worried I might ruin the vacation. Laura's father chuckled. Well, that's one way to surprise the family. Sophie pulled out a chair beside her. Grandma, sit with us. So I did. Dinner that night started awkwardly. Daniel kept watching me like he expected something to go wrong. But nothing did. The food was wonderful. The conversation slowly became relaxed again. And I quietly noticed something interesting. For someone who was supposed to slow everyone down, I had already walked more miles in Rome than any of them. But the real surprises of that trip were only just beginning. Because 3 days later, something happened on the Amalfi Coast that none of us were prepared for. And that moment was when my son finally began to realize how wrong he had been about me. For the next 2 days we explored Rome together, though together might not be the right word. Daniel kept expecting me to struggle. Every time we approached a staircase, he glanced at me first. When we crossed busy streets, he slowed down slightly, as if I might suddenly forget how traffic works. At one point, Laura even asked if I wanted to sit down while they visited the Colosseum. I've waited 40 years to see this place, I told her gently. I think I'll manage standing for an hour. Sophie walked beside me and whispered, Grandma, you're cooler than Dad expected. I smiled. Don't tell him that. The kids, Sophie and her younger brother Marcus, were the only ones who seemed genuinely delighted that I had come. To them, it wasn't strange that I traveled alone. It was impressive. And that difference in perspective said a lot. 3 days later we took a train south toward the Amalfi Coast. The scenery changed slowly outside the windows, cities becoming hills, hills becoming cliffs overlooking deep blue water. The small coastal town where we stayed looked like something from a postcard. Houses painted soft yellow and coral clung to the cliffs above the sea. Narrow streets wound between small bakeries, fruit stands, and little shops selling handmade ceramics. The air smelled like salt and lemons. On the second day there, something happened that shifted the mood of the trip. We had just finished lunch at a small restaurant overlooking the water. Daniel suddenly began patting his pockets, then his backpack, then the table. "What's wrong?" Laura asked. "My passport." "What about it?" "I can't find it." At first nobody was too worried. People misplace things all the time while traveling. But 10 minutes later Daniel's voice had changed. "I had it this morning. I'm sure of it." We checked the restaurant. Nothing. We retraced our steps through the street market. Nothing. Daniel's frustration grew quickly. "This is exactly why I didn't want a complicated trip," he muttered. Laura tried to calm him down. "It'll turn up." But he shook his head. "If I lost it, getting a replacement could take days." That's when Laura's father quietly asked the obvious question. "Where do we even report something like that here?" Everyone looked at each other. No one knew. The town was small. The signs were mostly in Italian. Daniel rubbed his forehead. "This is a disaster." I had been quiet up to that point. Then I spoke. "There's a police station 2 streets uphill from the harbor." Everyone turned to look at me. "How do you know that?" Daniel asked. "I walked past it yesterday morning." He blinked. "You went exploring by yourself?" "Yes." Laura's mother looked relieved. "Can you help us explain the situation?" "Of course." The police station was small and surprisingly calm. Inside, an older officer listened patiently while I explained Daniel's situation in Italian. Daniel watched the conversation like someone trying to read a foreign movie without subtitles. The officer nodded and asked a few questions. After 10 minutes, he disappeared into a back room. When he returned, he held a passport. Daniel's passport. A fisherman had found it earlier near the harbor and turned it in. Daniel stared at it in disbelief. "You're kidding." The officer smiled and handed it over. Outside the station, Daniel exhaled deeply. "I can't believe that worked." "You're welcome," I said lightly. He looked at me differently for a moment. Then we walked back toward the harbor. But later that evening, something else happened that reminded me Daniel still hadn't fully let go of his assumptions. We were sitting at a seaside restaurant when Laura mentioned the next day's plan. "There's a boat tour along the coast tomorrow," she said. "It goes through the caves and stops for swimming." "That sounds fun," Sophie said. Marcus immediately agreed. Daniel hesitated. Then he looked at me. "Mom, the boat might be a little rough. Lots of waves." "I've been on boats before." "I know, but it could be tiring." There it was again. The quiet suggestion that perhaps I should sit this one out. Laura noticed the tension. "We can always split up," she suggested quickly. "Some of us can do the boat tour, and others can explore the town." Sophie frowned. "Why wouldn't Grandma come?" Daniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I decided to save him from himself. "I'll join the boat," I said calmly. The tour left the next morning just after sunrise. The water was calm and sparkling. The boat itself was small but sturdy, carrying about 10 passengers. As we pulled away from the harbor, the cliffs of the Amalfi Coast rose around us like enormous walls of stone. Everyone was excited. Even Daniel seemed to relax. The captain pointed out caves carved into the rock by centuries of waves. We passed hidden beaches only accessible by water. The sea glittered like blue glass. For a while everything felt peaceful. Then the wind changed. It happened gradually at first. The waves grew slightly higher. The boat rocked more noticeably. Most people didn't worry, but I saw the captain glance at the sky. Within 20 minutes the water had become rougher. Nothing dangerous yet, but strong enough that passengers began gripping the railings. Marcus suddenly looked pale. "I don't feel good," he whispered. Laura rubbed his back. "It's just the waves." But then Sophie slipped while moving across the deck. The boat lurched at the same moment. She grabbed the side railing, but her balance was shaky. Daniel rushed forward. "Careful." Another wave hit the side of the boat harder than the others. Sophie lost her footing completely. For a split second she tipped toward the open water. The moment was so quick that most people froze. But I didn't. I moved forward, grabbed her arm firmly, and pulled her back against the seat. She landed beside me, breathing fast. Daniel stared at both of us. "Are you okay?" Sophie nodded, still wide-eyed. "I almost fell." Daniel turned to me. "You moved faster than I did." I shrugged slightly. Mother instincts don't disappear with age. The captain soon turned the boat back toward the harbor as the wind continued to rise. The ride back was quieter. Everyone seemed thoughtful. When we stepped onto the dock again, Daniel stood beside me for a moment. "Mom," he said slowly. "Yes. I think I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For assuming you'd be the one needing help." I looked out over the water. Travel has a way of revealing things about people. He nodded. But the most important moment of the entire trip hadn't happened yet. That came 3 nights later during a quiet family dinner that none of us would ever forget. And it was the conversation at that table that truly changed our family forever. That evening, we gathered for dinner at the villa Laura had rented. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, but inside, the air was tense. Daniel kept glancing at me, as if measuring how much trouble I might cause. I sat at the head of the table, naturally commanding attention without raising my voice. The meal began quietly, polite conversation drifting across topics of sightseeing and local food. But then, as if guided by some invisible force, the conversation shifted. Daniel mentioned the boat ride. "I can't believe you handled Sophie like that," he said, half in awe, half in disbelief. I looked at him calmly. "I didn't handle her, Daniel. I reacted." He hesitated, then said, "You moved faster than I could have. I just assumed you'd need help every step of the way." I set down my fork slowly. "And yet, you doubted me before we even left your front door." Laura looked uneasy. "Let's not argue at dinner." But I ignored her. It was time for honesty. "You see, Daniel, the reason you thought I'd ruin this vacation is the same reason you assume a lot about life in general. You underestimate experience. You overestimate age. And you forget that wisdom doesn't fade just because your mother is 70. He flinched but didn't interrupt. "I wasn't always like this," I continued, voice softening. "I wasn't always the one people depended on without question. When I was your age, I started over many times. I moved cities, learned new skills, faced losses. And each time, I built something from nothing. Not money, character, respect, independence. That's what this trip is about. Not sightseeing. Not the sea. It's about understanding each other." The room was silent. Even Marcus had stopped fidgeting. Sophie's wide eyes reflected a mixture of admiration and shock. Daniel swallowed hard. I didn't realize. I never thought about what you've done before, Mom. All those years, working, moving, learning. I thought retirement meant slowing down. You thought I would just fade away," I said. "Disappear quietly because I'm old. But I didn't disappear. And I never will, not as long as I can breathe. Not as long as I have a mind that wants to think, a heart that wants to care, and hands that can still build." Laura finally spoke, voice tight. I didn't mean to make you feel excluded." I nodded slightly. "I know. But intention isn't always the same as impact. You kept me at a distance from this family, because you assumed I couldn't contribute. And Daniel, you thought I'd ruin your vacation. But the truth is, I made it safer. And I made it memorable." Daniel's face reddened. "I'm sorry. I never thought. I was wrong. You were right to come. You were right about everything. And Sophie suddenly interrupted, pointing at Daniel. "Dad, Grandma's amazing. Don't you see? She's incredible." Marcus nodded vigorously. "Yeah, Dad. She saved me from falling in the boat." Daniel looked down, shame and realization mixing in his expression. I never meant to underestimate you. I really didn't." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "It's not too late to change that. You don't have to live thinking of people as incapable just because of their age. You don't have to limit anyone, including yourself." Laura looked at me, finally understanding. I guess we've all learned something here. The children beamed. The tension in the room finally lifted, replaced by warmth. For the first time in years, the family felt connected in a real way, not just superficially. The next day, Daniel approached me privately. "Mom, I want to learn about your business, about how you built everything. I want to understand your decisions. Maybe I can help somehow." I smiled. "You don't have to help me, Daniel. You need to understand how to build your own life responsibly. That's the lesson here. I built because I had to, because I refused to be dismissed. You'll build because you choose to, or because you see the consequences of not choosing." That afternoon, the children wanted to explore a nearby cliffside trail. Daniel, Laura, and I walked together. He asked about the boat again, about planning, about mistakes he had made in the past. I answered honestly. I told him stories of fear, failure, and resilience. He listened as if discovering a new world. Over the course of the week, I saw small but meaningful changes. Daniel allowed me to navigate directions without intervention. Laura asked for my advice on daily plans. Even small moments, like helping Sophie pick a seashell or explaining how to bargain at the local market, felt different. They treated me as capable, not frail. On the final evening, we all sat on the terrace overlooking the Mediterranean. The sky was a deep indigo, stars beginning to pierce the horizon. Daniel raised his glass of sparkling water. "To family," he said. "To realizing that wisdom doesn't age, it grows. And to Mom, for proving all of us wrong." I held my glass high. To seeing clearly, and to never underestimating someone who refuses to disappear. Laura hugged me. Sophie hugged me. Marcus hugged me. Daniel hugged me last, tightly, almost as if he was trying to make up for lost years. That night, as I lay in my room watching the moonlight dance on the water, I realized something profound. Age is not a barrier. Experience is not a limitation. And love, carefully persistent, patient, and unshakable, is stronger than any doubt, any criticism, any preconception. By the time we returned home, the family dynamic had shifted forever. Daniel no longer assumed I was too old to start over, or to contribute. Laura stopped underestimating me. The children, having witnessed courage in action, respected and admired me as much as they had any adult in their lives. Years later, Daniel often credits me as the inspiration for his own business ventures, now run ethically and thoughtfully. Laura speaks of me as a partner in family decisions rather than a critic. And Sophie and Marcus, well, they still whisper to their friends that Grandma is cooler than anyone they know. Sometimes I reflect on that trip. I think about the initial tension, the misunderstandings, the fear that my family might reject me. And then I remember the exact moment on the boat, when Sophie almost fell, and I acted without hesitation. That was the moment I realized, it's not about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself capable, no matter the assumptions stacked against you. I am not just a grandmother. I am not just a mother. I am not just a woman in her 70s. I am a force to be reckoned with, a life fully lived, a mind still sharp, and a heart unafraid to step forward when it matters most. And my family, once skeptical, now knows it. They will never underestimate me again.